When the Oklahoma Supreme Court voted 5-1 last week to overturn a $465 million settlement in the state's opioid trial against Johnson & Johnson, it raised a lot of questions, not only about the reversal, but what it means for Oklahoma's efforts to combat the opioid epidemic in the future. To discuss that in depth, here's Susan Cadeau and her panel of guests.
Thank you, Rich. There is so much to discuss here. I want to go ahead and introduce our panel of guests. First, we have Terry White, who is with the Mental Health Association of Oklahoma, CEO, Brad Beckwith, who is an attorney for the state of Oklahoma, and Cassie McClung, who is a reporter for our content partner, The Frontier. Thank all of you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to give a little bit of a review, some information we pulled just to give some context and a reminder for everyone that, a couple of years ago, an Oklahoma District Court held Johnson & Johnson responsible for a $465 million fine for public nuisance is what it was called. And that was in accordance with the pharmaceutical's responsibility in generating a crisis of opioid addiction. But last week, the Supreme Court of Oklahoma overturned that decision. That's our starting point. That's where we're going. Cassie, I want to start with you. In that case, the focus seemed to have been on the damage caused by opioid manufacturers. Could you sum up both the arguments of the state and the pharmaceutical for us?
Sure. And I'll go back a little bit because I'm sure it'll come up again. But so the former Attorney General filed this case against several drug manufacturers back in 2017. And by the time that the trial started, Johnson & Johnson was the only company left that hadn't settled. So the Attorney General's argument, and they were making the argument under the state's public nuisance laws, was that Johnson & Johnson had intentionally contributed to the state's opioid epidemic with an aggressive marketing campaign that exaggerated the drug's benefits and also downplayed their addictive and potentially dangerous qualities. And Johnson & Johnson's argument was that the company had only contributed a small percentage of opioid drugs circulating in the state. And they also argued that the state's public nuisance law didn't apply in this case.
Terry, I want to come to you next really quickly. This was in 2019, we're 2 years out. Is there still an opioid crisis? Did it all just go away, or are we still having issues? And also, has any of the money that have come not only to Oklahoma, but maybe to other states, has helped as they were intended to?
We unfortunately are absolutely still in the midst of an opioid crisis. If you look specifically at what happened in Oklahoma, and it is directly attributable to Johnson & Johnson, I want to just say up front, the Supreme Court overturning that decision didn't overturn the decision that Johnson & Johnson was responsible. What they said was that the nuisance law wasn't the way to pursue it. They didn't argue with the judge's finding that Johnson & Johnson had caused the opioid epidemic and was the kingpin in the opioid epidemic. None of that was in the Supreme Court ruling. And what we have in Oklahoma is you can clearly see that beginning with Johnson & Johnson's aggressive and honestly false and misleading marketing, where they told doctors across the nation by paying other doctors to say that these drugs weren't addictive and downplaying the risks of that addiction for all populations, including pregnant women, we saw a significant rise in overprescribing in the state of Oklahoma. It began across the nation, but what we care about is the state of Oklahoma beginning in the early 90s. And as that prescribing got out of control, as did the rates of addiction and opioid overdose, and my previous role as Commissioner of Mental Health and Substance Abuse for the state of Oklahoma, when we realized what was happening, because at first you don't see these sort of nefarious plans sneaking up on you, but when we realized what was happening, we started an incredibly aggressive campaign of our own through prevention and intervention and treatment strategies to reduce the number of opioid deaths in our state. And that began happening in 2012 and had been decreasing, but we don't have the resources to get anywhere back to near the levels that we had prior to what Johnson & Johnson did.
Brad, I want to come to you because I want to dive into some legal weeds with you on this. First of all, what is your reaction to the Supreme Court decision?
Well, my heart really aches for Oklahoma and for the moms and dads and sisters and brothers who have suffered through this crisis at no fault of their own. The decision the Supreme Court made really wasn't one based in fact. If you read the opinion, there's no discussion of the facts. And as Terry said, they don't challenge the fact that the trial court here found that Johnson & Johnson created a menace to the public. Our nuisance law has been on the books since Oklahoma was a territory. And nowhere does the statute or any case that's ever come out in the state of Oklahoma's history say you can't use public nuisance this way. The law is very clear. If someone engages in unlawful conduct that affects public health or offends decency, the attorney general of the state's empowered to bring an action for what's called abatement against that company. And when we went up on appeal, one of the arguments that Johnson & Johnson made was, look, if we apply the nuisance law this way, businesses, including oil companies, might get hit down the road with similar lawsuits. We countered that. The chairman of Continental Oil came in and said, no way, what's bad for business is killing our people. Business leaders in the auto industry, real estate industry, banking industry, and every medical group in the state of Oklahoma, plus the legislature, the House and the Senate, came in and said, look, this law is applied the right way. You need to do what's right for the state and affirm this judgment. So yeah, the fact that the Supreme Court ignored all of that and ignored 100 years of history, yeah, it's shocking to me.
So Cassie, I want to come to you. I know you've been taking a look at this for a while. When it comes to the public nuisance law, what reason did you hear the court give for saying it's not applicable in this case? Why did they say it wasn't applicable?
Yeah, and Brad might be able to explain this a little bit better, but essentially they said that the judge went too far in how he applied the public nuisance law and that it wasn't applicable in holding the opioid companies accountable. They said that essentially once they manufacture the drug, that how doctors distribute it or how it's distributed, it's out of their hands. And I'm sure Brad might be able to explain that a little bit more eloquently, but that was the gist of it.
No,
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Brad. Yeah.
well, I think you did a great job with it. It's really that simple. And what happens with nuisance law, there are states that limit nuisance law to issues involving property. Texas is one of them. Texas very expressly says in their statute it only applies to property cases. Oklahoma's doesn't say that.
Terry, you've been so passionate about this. What would you want to say if you could have your druthers? What should happen now? Is this it? Is this the end?
This is not the end. We have too many Oklahomans dying. Literally hundreds of Oklahomans are still dying each year from opioid overdose. That doesn't account for the thousands struggling with addiction. This is significantly impacting families and businesses across our state. The end of this story is not that Johnson & Johnson skirts their responsibility, which is what they try to do repeatedly in multiple forums, in multiple cases. And we're not ready to give up as the state. And Brad can probably talk a little bit about what that means, but this isn't over for the state of Oklahoma. We have too many lives on the line.
All right, Brad, take it away.
Thanks, Susan. And Cassie started out by giving a summary of what happened here, but let me just step back in a little more detail. The state of Oklahoma, starting with the Attorney General's office, showed a tremendous amount of courage here to stand up to these industries. Other states have followed suit and filed their own cases, but Oklahoma was the tip of the spear here. That strategy's worked very, very well for Oklahoma despite this ruling, and I'll break that down. We first settled with Purdue and the Sackler family. We recovered $270 million for the state, and $200 million of that went to Oklahoma State University. And the idea was to put this money to use in a way that could make Oklahoma a centerpiece for the country on research, prevention, and treatment. So that money's there at Oklahoma State. We think that'll be a seed for things to come. Now, had we not pursued the strategy we did, we wouldn't have got any of that. Purdue and the Sacklers went into bankruptcy. There's been a settlement there that over maybe a 10-year period, some states will get paid. Our share in that bankruptcy would have been 26 million bucks. So right there, that's a 10 multiple that the state got. With Teva Pharmaceuticals, who we settled with on the Saturday before trial, we recovered $85 million. They have paid one state to date. That was Louisiana. They paid them 13 million and they're going to pay it over 15 years. Altogether, so far, we've got 373 million to the state of Oklahoma. Now, real quickly, what Mrs. Commissioner White was talking about, I'll always call her commissioner. That's just who she is to me. We have a plan through General O'Connor. We have cases pending against 3 of the major distributors of opioids in this country. They're pending in Durant. We've survived motions to dismiss there, and we're headed towards trial. The state also preserves certain claims against Johnson & Johnson, and the Attorney General will make decisions about what we're going to do with that as we go forward.
It sounds like some of the money we may not get for a long time, if ever. Cassie, I want to ask you, you've been covering this for a while. How long do you anticipate to be covering this? Is this something that's going to end up being a generational story? And also, Cassie, is this money going where it was supposed to go? The money that we have received, what have you seen there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll start with the first part of your question. I absolutely think this is going to be a story for, years and years and generations to come. Like Brad said, the legal battle is far from over. And as Terry mentioned earlier, Oklahoma is still seeing an opioid crisis in the state. So you have a health story and you have a legal story. And I don't expect that to, slow down anytime soon. And to go to your other question about the money spent. So the state has, from settlements, the state has gotten over $370 million so far. A lot of that did go to OSU, and that's earmarked for a center that they're planning there. Some of it is still waiting with the Attorney General's office, and that money is supposed to go to cities and counties for abatement efforts, treatment, and whatnot. So I think the pandemic, from what I understand, especially when it comes to OSU and the Attorney General's office and some other similar agencies, it really slowed down how they were planning to spend their money. But for the most part, all of that, the majority of that money has been earmarked for spending. And obviously, as far as the Johnson & Johnson settlement goes, that was already in the air and pending a Supreme Court decision. So there were no, as far as I know, there were no solid plans on where that money was going to go specifically. But my understanding was it was going to go toward, abatement efforts around the opioid crisis.
And
I just add to what Cassie's saying.
I thought it was supposed to go to counties. More than half of it went to the OSU Center. And Terry, I wanted to find out what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, well, let me explain. The money that went to Oklahoma State University Center for Health Sciences to create the National Center for Wellness and Recovery was supposed to go there. That was the settlement agreement the Sackler family made. In fact, the agreement they made is we will only settle if a national center is created. So that money went exactly where it was supposed to. And OSU has been doing some incredible things under Dr. Casey Strum's leadership. In fact, the gold standard for treatment for opioid addiction is something called medication-assisted treatment. And they are offering that across the state to any Oklahoman in need, even via telemedicine, because connecting to those services sometimes is really challenging if you don't live near the National Center. So they have also set up agreements with federally qualified health centers across the state. They are working to create agreements with community mental health centers across the state. If they don't have the staff and the physicians trained to do this evidence-based gold standard treatment, they can connect with OSU to receive that treatment for all Oklahomans in need. So there are some amazing things happening already out of that national center. But if Johnson & Johnson doesn't step up and pay their fair share, we will not be able to fully abate this crisis.
I want to have my last question. It's for you, Brad. We have a new Attorney General now. What do you foresee going forward, and how fast do you see it happening?
Well, I've gotten to know General O'Connor. He comes from a long background of being a lawyer, doing very complex cases and transactions. What I've gotten to learn from him is that he's very smart, he's meticulous, and he's deliberate in his decision making. We're going to pursue the distributor case. As I said, we've got trial coming up in the next 18 months or so. I should have noted earlier, there are global settlements here. The Johnson & Johnson, because of what we did, ended up having to throw $5 billion into a global settlement with the rest of the country. The take for Oklahoma, and that was $13 million. So it wasn't like we had a good amount of money to walk away from when the state needs billions. Likewise, the distributors have offered $26 billion globally to all states and cities and counties. General O'Connor declined to participate in that settlement when it came out, and we're going to continue to blaze our own path and try to achieve a better result for the state of Oklahoma.
I want to thank all of you for your time to talk about this important issue, because at the heart of it, while we're talking legalities and plans and settlements, are real people. And I know you've all met them in your work as journalists, as attorneys, as advocates, as the commissioner, Terry, and so have I. These are real people who've lost family members, who are suffering with addiction. And that's what this is all about. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, for your time and for your efforts on behalf of the state.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Susan, thank you. Great conversation. And we wanted to let you know that our new Oklahoma News Report podcast is now available. Each week, it will feature extended cuts of our in-depth segments, as well as other content from our newscast and digital platforms. You can find our latest episode on Spotify or Apple Podcasts first thing Saturday morning. We encourage you to check it out and subscribe, rate, and review our extra content.